Who will be the number 2 option in the passing game for Dak Prescott? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're continuing with our 10 burning questions as we inch closer and closer to minicamp and training camp. And today we're taking a look at the Cowboys pass catchers. So we know CeeDee Lamb is going to be the target hog on this team. He's going to average 10-ish targets a game. But who is going to be the number 2 option here for the Dallas Cowboys? I want to start with Brandin Cooks, who, by definition, is the number 2 receiver on the roster right now on the depth chart. Do you think Brandin Cooks at this stage of his career can function as a high-level number 2 receiver?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the big question. I think obviously he's done that for the vast majority of his career when he hasn't been, a main target at different points. But I think, this is Brandin Cooks is a very unique player. And we've talked about it in his career, and his path in his career is very unique as well, right? You just don't see many players that get traded multiple times for high value picks when they aren't necessarily the number 1 wide receiver on your team. He seemingly is a wide receiver 2 for hire and has been for almost the entirety of his career. So he comes to the Cowboys last year, and, early on, it felt like it was a little bit lackluster. I mean, he was averaging, I think, something around 4 targets a game. And then as the season, I really feel like that Chargers game where he got that first touchdown, which I actually happened to be at, was really kind of a turning point for Brandin Cooks, and things started to kind of turn a little bit. And it's not so much that he started getting a ton more targets, though eventually that did happen as the season kind of wore on. It's more that I think the Cowboys understood how to target him a little bit better, and how to get the ball to him in a way that is advantageous to his skill set. I think as the season kind of progressed, you saw more targets because they understood how to be more efficient with him and how to get him the ball the way that he would succeed with. And I think that you didn't see a ton of drop off necessarily. And, look, he turned 30 early last year. He'll be 31 at the beginning of this season. So he is obviously getting up there. But I do think that he's also a guy that has taken really good care of himself, has really, gone out of his way to make sure that he has, taken care of his body. He didn't seem to show a ton of drop off at the end of the season that I saw. No. So I feel pretty confident that he's going to be able to come in and kind of at least produce on the level that he did last year. And in fact, honestly, I wouldn't be totally shocked if he came in here and actually produced maybe even a little bit better, just because that first month of the season isn't going to be a kind of, a feeling out period between him and Dak. Like, they're pretty well established.
Well, and Mike McCarthy, right? Just learning.
True. Yes. Absolutely. Right. Good point. Yeah.
So over the final 9 games of the season, he averaged 55 yards, scored 6 touchdowns. Like, if you tell me right now, hey, he's going to average 55 yards a game this season for 17 games, sign me up. Like, that's a 1,000-yard receiver as, playing alongside of CeeDee Lamb, who, again, every time that CeeDee Lamb's on the field, he's going to be almost a lock to get 100 total yards, right? Yeah. So 55-ish yards a game sounds great. You do worry about the age. I mean, I think he's 30, or he's going to be 31 this year. And while that's not really,
I think in October, if I'm
31 in October. While that's not old for a receiver, it's also, he's been around for a long time. Like, you look at that 2014 class of receivers, and it's like Odell Beckham is on his last legs. Jarvis Landry's been out of the NFL for a while. Allen Robinson is dust at this point. Like, he and Devontae Adams are really the only 2 receivers from that class who are still producing.
But what's the difference between all those guys and Devontae Adams and Cooks is they have mostly avoided a lot of injuries. Whereas Odell Beckham Jr. is, constantly dealing with some sort of lower body injury, and it's really sapped his athleticism and has sapped his ability to kind of continue to play at a high level, or at least at the level that we were used to with someone like that. So I think that's what your hope is, right? Is that the fact that he's remained relatively healthy, he does take very, very good care of his body. But listen, I mean, age comes for all of us, right? I could do a whole podcast about how age comes for all of us. But I think the hope is, yeah, the hope is that he's able to kind of continue where he was at this point. And then if he does have kind of a tail off at a certain point, that maybe as he starts to tail off near the end of the season, a certain other member of the Dallas Cowboys may be making his ascension
Sure.
from a different position.
So one of the reasons why this matters so much to me, kind of figuring out who is the game in and game out number 2 option in the passing attack, is number 1. We have no idea what the rushing attack is going to look like with Tony Pollard, right? Like, they just might have to throw the ball a lot this year. So it would be really nice to have that other guy that you can rely on in big spots. And when you look at the rest of the NFC, Landon, right? Like the 49ers have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, now Ricky Pearsall, and Christian McCaffrey. The Lions have Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gibbs, who can work as a receiver. The Eagles obviously have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. I just feel like for the first time in a while, the Cowboys are a little bit behind some of the top contenders when it comes to their pass catching options. So they really need somebody to step up, and maybe it'll be number 2 option by committee, which can work. But I also think it's really nice on a key 3rd and 6. Like, I know there's going to be one-on-one coverage with my number 2 receiver, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And he's going to get open and he's going to catch the ball. Like, it's important to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the good news for the Cowboys is that I do feel like they have a nice floor here, right? Like, Cooks provides a nice floor that, I feel like, the haggling we're going to do about Cooks' performance potentially would be, is it a 550-yard season, or is it a 750-yard season, or is it a 1,000-yard season? But I feel like at the very minimum, you're going to get, if he's healthy and can play, stay on the field for the most of the season, you're going to get a guy who can give you, like you mentioned, anywhere from 40 to 70 yards a game, and hopefully up 3/4 of a touchdown, right? Like, and that's what you're hoping for. And I think that is something that you actually can rely on with Cooks. Like, he's probably one of the more set your clock by, I'm going to produce.
He's not high variance at all. Like, no. I think we kind of know week to week what he's going to provide you.
Yeah. And that's a nice thing to have, especially on this offense where, you've got some unknown. We'll talk about the next 2 guys who I think have some high variance to what could happen next season, both positive and negative. But I think Cooks is the guy that, is it possible he goes nuts and has a 1,200-yard, 10-touchdown season? Maybe CeeDee Lamb gets all the attention in the world and no one can cover Cooks. But I feel like that is equally as likely as him not being able to produce up to 600 yards receiving.
Yeah, and he kind of transitions back to the number 3 option, or the number 3 receiver. Which, again, if that happens because he turns 31 this year, like, we shouldn't be as surprised. No. I have my doubts that it will, because I just saw somebody who got better and better in this offense last year.
I agree.
First of all, once they gave him more targets, and once he became more comfortable in the offense. Let's talk about Jake Ferguson, who we know is going to be the Cowboys' starting tight end. Could he end up being the second most important receiver on this offense? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that's Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for some extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and the data you need in one place. They are the number 1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspective, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users every month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That is yahoofinance.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Landon, let's talk about Jake Ferguson, who went from being a part-time player as a rookie to being a full-time starter. By the end of the year, becoming a real weapon. What's the ceiling for Jake Ferguson in this offense?
That's the big question with this whole group, right? Is that I think we have an idea with Cooks, right, of what's what you're going to get, with hopes that he could be maybe a little bit better than you thought. Tolbert, I think, we'll talk about him in the next section, but I think there's a lot of wide variance that could happen there. But as far as the actual hope, hey, where can this improvement come from, and where do you feel like, of these players, that you think that you can get a step above that you were at this point last year? I think it's the hope that Ferguson takes one more step this year as a tight end, right? What we saw last year was obviously a great improvement on the previous season, and we've seen that kind of level of stepping up each year so far. And so last year he ended up with 71 catches for 761 yards, averaging just over 10 yards a catch. Now, I do think that I would like to, if we're talking about specifics of his game that we would like to see improvement on, I think the specific area where I would like to see Ferguson improve as a receiver is in the contested catch area, right? It felt like there were a couple different times when he got his hands on the football up high and things got a little bit physical and he wasn't able to come down with the ball. And I don't know that that's a lack of physicality. I think it's more just, you need to take more and more reps of getting used to the contact, securing the ball, bringing the ball into your body, not double clutching it when you're getting hit in the right moments.
This is what made Jason Witten so great. Like, if the ball hit Jason Witten's hands, it wasn't getting ripped out. And that happened way too many times last year, where defenders would get their wrist, their hands on his wrist, and they'd be able to kind of swipe away the ball. I mean, those little plays can be the difference in winning, losing games. So I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen from Ferguson is he does the hard stuff, right? He produces on a high level. He can catch the ball and he gets yak. He's a weapon as a receiver, right? What we need is for him to raise the floor a little bit on his game and be a little bit more consistent as a catcher as well. And I think if you do that, I mean, man, I really do think I would love to go back through his tape and just add in the catches that he dropped in that specific scenario that I just mentioned, and see what his numbers were this year, right? Because I guarantee you it's a lot closer to 1,000 yards, probably 2 or 3 more touchdowns at least.
Easily.
Yeah, and maybe the Cowboys get a win or two, because I think some of those catches were at key moments. So I think if Ferguson wants to take that step and kind of say, hey, Brandon, I got this, I'll be the other guy, I think he's going to need to raise the consistency in his game. He's got the explosiveness. He's got the game-breaking ability. He's got all that kind of stuff. He's difficult to bring down when he has the football in his hands. He's physical. He's got an attitude. Man, I think back about that Seattle game against
Jamal Adams' career.
Jamal Adams, he basically ended Jamal Adams's mentioned as a good safety in this league, and basically put that to bed. I think that if Ferguson is able to kind of find a way to get a little bit more consistency in some of the more not simple plays, but making the tougher plays a little bit more consistently, I think Ferguson's well on his way to a Pro Bowl and maybe more if he can keep going.
I agree with you. First of all, I love the attitude that
Me
he
too.
brings to
Yeah.
the offense. Like,
Yeah.
he's a jerk in the best way possible,
Yep.
right?
He's
And
our
this
jerk.
he's our jerk, and
Yeah,
I think the Cowboys need a little bit more of that edge to them. So
absolutely.
that part of it is really good. And if you look at some of the stable metrics from PFF, I mean, there's so much to like 86th percentile receiving grade, 88th percentile receiving grade against zone coverage, 80th percentile yards after the catch per route run, 72nd percentile in yards per route run. But one of the areas that he struggles is he doesn't create a lot of separation. And I think this comes back to him not being a great athlete, like 14th percentile separation percentage. And then his contested catch percentage was right around average, right?
Mhm.
So if you're going to be in a lot of contested catch
You
situations,
gotta be better than that.
you've got to be able to make those contested catches. So
That's right.
I think it's going to come. Now, how much can he improve in year 3? We'll see. But it wouldn't shock me at all if he just becomes the second most reliable option. And if CD's getting doubled, it's Jake Ferguson that's taking on more of the load in terms of targets.
I mean, I'll go even a step further. I mean, not to kind of overhype him, but I wouldn't be shocked if Jake Ferguson had a really great offseason, and now we're talking about him as top 5 tight ends in the league. You know what I'm
It's
saying?
not
Like,
hard to believe that. Yeah.
it's not a hard leap. With the way that the league is right now, there's a crop of these tight ends that are kind of getting older. The younger group of tight ends really haven't kind of fully come on. I mean, besides Sam Laporta, there isn't a ton of great young tight ends that have really kind of taken that step. And Ferguson is in that conversation, So I would like it. It feels like Ferguson is kind of right on the precipice of something. And if he can kind of put it all together, maybe you've got a guy who can be, look, we don't want to call him Travis Kelce, but maybe
Could he
in
be
that
Mark
vein,
Andrews?
right?
Could he be
Yeah,
Mark Andrews if everything
absolutely.
goes right?
Absolutely, he could be Mark Andrews. I think he absolutely is in that kind of vein of player, and I think a two-way player that gives you plus receiving options, and is a guy who can bury somebody in the run game. So, yeah, I do think that Ferguson is able to kind of get into that air of tight ends with a really solid offseason and a just kind of continuation of where he's been so far this in his career.
Of the 3 players that we're going to talk about, Brandin Cooks, Jake Ferguson, and Jalen Tolbert, he's probably the one that I have the most confidence in,
Yeah,
like taking their game to the next
taking the next
level.
step. Yeah,
Just because we saw it at times, and even the playoff game, like I know a lot of it came in garbage time, but he had 100 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game, and he was making some unbelievable catches in that one. I'm not really expecting him to be 1,000-yard receiver or anything like that, because you just have to get a lot of targets at the tight end
yeah,
position. But could he be 850 yards and 9
yeah.
touchdowns? I think so. And if that's the case, that's probably good enough to be a good number 2 option on this offense. So very, very encouraged with Jake Ferguson going into year 3. Another player going into year 3 that we are excited to see is Jalen Tolbert. Could he step up and be the number 2 option? We'll discuss that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering 10 burning questions about the Dallas Cowboys going into mini camps and going into training camp. Today on today's show, we're looking at who will be the number 2 option in the passing attack for the Cowboys this year. We discussed Brandin Cooks. We discussed Jake Ferguson. Now let's talk about Jalen Tolbert, because I think of these 3 players, if Tolbert ends up being that option, the number 2 guy in this offense, I think that's the best case scenario here.
Or the worst case, depending on how it goes.
Or
Like, it's either the worst thing has happened or the best thing has happened.
But the thing
right?
is, I just have a hard time believing that he would be the number 2 option unless he absolutely took it, right?
Or Ferguson and Cooks got injured and they
Yes.
for the whole season.
Well, yes.
Yeah, there are some worst case scenarios that knock it off wood.
Yeah.
No, I think it's absolutely true, and there's a lot of different reasons why, and I think part of what we've talked about throughout the offseason and when we were talking about draft prospects and wide receivers, one of the things that I kept on mentioning was that it really feels like this passing attack needs another outside receiver, needs a true X who can go out there and win, to draw coverage away from what's going on in the inside. Because, as we mentioned, Jake Ferguson, CeeDee Lamb. Like Lamb likes to operate in the slot. Ferguson is obviously a tight end. That's a lot of targeting that's going in the middle of the field, right? That's a lot of like, there's not a lot of room for everyone to operate in there. If you're trying to fit options there, you need to be able to draw coverage outside to and that was a big thing of why the Brandin Cooks signing was huge, right? Is because he's a speed guy who could stretch the field vertically, but also can just, make safeties have to play the sideline a little bit more.
Correct.
If you're able to get Jaylen Tolbert, the ability to kind of take another step, right? And then maybe play some more of that kind of X receiver on the outside, it really helps, draws away just it stops spreading the zones out, right? It starts spreading the attention away from the middle of the field, which allows guys like Ferguson and Lamb to operate a little bit more. And then on top of that, it just adds another element to your passing attack that you just didn't necessarily have, right? Like you can win more with these kind of deep slants, or you can put everybody on the right side and then Tolbert on the backside with the defender and then run slants to him and that sort of thing. So excuse me. I think that Tolbert is someone who obviously him taking a next step's good for his career. It's good just to would be good to have another receiver that can, perform at that level. But from a schematic point of view, a guy that is bigger like that, who could just be another X receiver to play on the outside to isolate with corners, I think that would really just help the entirety of the offense, kind of fit into place and really help to kind of stress a defense to make them defend the entire field, as opposed to just focusing in the middle of the field where obviously where Lamb and Ferguson are going to be.
The good news is we saw a progression from his rookie season to the second year, right? I think as a rookie, he had like 12 yards on 2 catches or something. Second year was better. I mean, didn't put up big numbers, 22 catches, 268 yards, made some big plays down the stretch, including like a 50-yard reception against the Dolphins. And then this offseason, you've heard a lot of positive buzz. There was an article from DallasCowboys.com, I believe that came out yesterday, that was talking about how the Cowboys expect another big jump. Mike McCarthy actually talked about him today, about how the confidence is continuing to grow for Jalen Tolbert. He just knows this offense well. So there are a lot of signs that, okay, maybe he is ready to go from a 300-yard receiver to a 700-yard receiver. I just have my doubts that it's going to be all of a sudden he's the clear-cut number 2 option in this offense. And frankly, the Cowboys probably don't need him to do that. But boy, would that be sweet if that happened.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like we're stating this like, it's either this. Well, we should be saying is we are not stating that. We're not saying that it's either wide receiver 2 or bust for Tolbert.
No,
there is lots of stops along that station in which he has reached success, and the success for the Cowboys that don't include him being the number 2 wide receiver, right? And I think just him being a viable starting wide receiver, especially again on the X, is going to help them schematically a lot, right? Even if he is the guy that is earned, target for targets, that's enough, right? Like that's success for me. So I don't need necessarily Tolbert to beat out Cooks and Ferguson, two kind of established guys for target counts. I just need him to be extremely efficient with the targets that he's being assigned, and for him to eat up target for targets, like the fourth wide receiver, or however you want to frame that in targets. And I need him to be efficient with those. So if he could get to wide receiver 2, obviously, like you said, it's either a really good sign or the very small chance of it being a very bad sign. But I think that doesn't need to be where Jalen Tolbert gets to in order for him and the Cowboys to find better success than they did last year.
One of the things that we saw last year, Landon, was that about halfway through the season, I think it was like week 8, week 9, Jalen Tolbert went from like 7 snaps a game to all of a sudden he's getting 20 to 30 snaps a game. Now, a lot of that, he was coming in certain packages and stuff, but they started to take Michael Gallup off the field and put Jalen Tolbert on the field with Brandin Cooks and CeeDee Lamb. It would be nice if we saw something similar happen again this year, where it's Brandin Cooks and CeeDee Lamb as your starters in 12 personnel. But by midway through the season, all of a sudden it switched. Now it's Jalen Tolbert on the field with CeeDee Lamb. Like, that's the kind of progression that I would like to see. The targets will come, the yards will come. It's, can you be the number 2 snap getter on this team midway through the season? If that's the case, I'll be really excited.
Yeah, like actually taking guys, like giving guys like Cooks and Lamb a break, right?
Yeah.
Like you're running 12 personnel, and maybe you don't need to have Lamb out there. You have Tolbert and Cooks out there just to give Lamb a breather, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's key, is just being having enough confidence in Tolbert so that you feel like you could put him on the field and the offense isn't going to lose a beat, right? Or isn't going to
Yes.
take a step back, that you can rely on him to do kind of some of the dirty stuff too. Like that's the other part of it, right? Like you're going to want him to be a blocker on the edge. You're going to want him to kind of do all the things that starting wide receivers do that, isn't as pretty, isn't like part of the kind of your Pro Bowl accolades listing, but are important parts of being a starting wide receiver. Those are all things that I think Tolbert, coming from a small school, not being super, well versed in football, not being a football player, his entire career, still being new to it. These are the kind of like the little minutia things that he really needed to kind of work on before you can even put him on the field, right? Because that's part of the issue, is that I have to be able to rely on you in the run game as well. Like if I need you to block a corner, you need to know what you're doing, because I can't have the play go for a -2 loss because you didn't block the cornerback, for God's sakes.
And one of their phrases is, you got to block to get the rock, right? And that's going to be the case for Jalen Tolbert this year. So if he can improve in that area of the game, I wouldn't be surprised if you see his snaps per game double pretty quickly. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.